Nathan here with Modern Deployment IT blog, where my goal is to provide real-world IT guides and experiences from the field. Today's topic is a video webcast of one of my IT blogs, that is Windows 10 Offline WaaS Servicing Updates via OSDBuilder PowerShell module. So if you're not familiar with OSD PowerShell module, it's a PowerShell module in the Microsoft Gallery, and it allows you to basically offline service the Windows 10 or Windows Server OS media as part of the update process. So this includes OneDriveSetup, enabling features and whatnot. So that's what we're going to get into today. So let's get started. Okie dokie. So again, as I mentioned, this webcast is concerning Windows 10 Offline WaaS Servicing Updates via OSDBuilder module. This OSDBuilder PowerShell module is developed by one of the experts on Twitter, Surge OSD. You can follow him on Twitter. I'll reference him later in the presentation. He basically maintains this PowerShell module, and I have a not a webcast, but a website step-by-step guide on how to do this. So I thought it'd be a good idea to have a video webcast of this. It's always good to see things in person versus reading it sometimes. Okay, so let's get into this now. Alrighty. So the agenda for today, we're going to cover what are the high-level goals that we want to create from this process, essentially. What are the requirements for the PowerShell OSDBuilder module? What is the environment you need to have as well? What are the prerequisite steps that you need to follow? We'll go through those steps in a demonstration using the lab environment. Basically, this will be our management machine that we'll use to do this on a month-to-month basis. We'll also go over importing the OSD PowerShell module, obviously, installing it, setting an OSD builder directly or a scratch base. Otherwise, by default, it will go to the C drive. It'll be a folder called C OSD Builder. We'll do that in the machine I have as a VM, but I'll at least show you the commands to, create a temporary scratch base if you wanted to use a different drive besides the OS drive, so that if you have multiple drives in a VM or what have you. We'll go through importing the module, or rather importing the OSDMedia from a mounted ISO that we pre-downloaded for Windows 10 or Windows Server. We'll go through updating OneDriveSetup. This is good for Windows 10, so you have the latest version of OneDrive as part of the ISO build. We'll go through creating a new OSBuild task. So this is the task that's used once you import the media. This task is used on a month-to-month basis to run various configurations. So if you want to enable or disable features, you can use different tasks to accomplish that with this PowerShell module. Updating the OS media, so going out and downloading the content from the Microsoft catalog and getting the latest Service Stack updates, cumulative updates, the Adobe Flash updates, etc. And then we'll build from that media, we'll build and patch those features that we enabled earlier with the task. Then finally, one of the final steps we'll do is create the actual media. Once we've downloaded the content through the PowerShell script, we'll create an ISO media, which we would then test and import into the SCCM console for deployment through a task sequence. Then we'll review the monthly update cycle. So as there's a few commands you can run every month to update the OSDBuilder PowerShell module itself. So every month there's a new version that comes out. Obviously, to support the latest servicing stack updates, the latest cumulative updates, you have to run the PowerShell module to get those updates on the machine you're using to run the script. And then finally, we'll go over some helpful OSDBuilder PowerShell commands that you can use on a day-to-day basis. So the high-level goals. So the first one is we want to ensure that we have the monthly Windows 10 updates or server OS update. that they're included in the ISO or the WIM image that we import into SCCM or MDT as a package for OS deployment. So this could be used for an SCCM MDT task sequence, integrated task sequence, or a standard SCCM task sequence, or you can use this for an MDT standalone task sequence. The second thing as a goal is we want to ensure we have the latest OneDrive setup and that we include that in the Windows 10 ISO media so that when we install and reference that newest updated ISO and the media that we import into SCCM, that it also includes an updated version of OneDrive. And in some cases, we want to either the third goal rather is that we want to enable or disable Windows 10 OS features such as .NET 3.5, SMB version 1, and more. This is something that SCCM servicing can't do at the moment. So within SCCM, you have the option to right-click on the media and choose Service Updates. That's just installing the cumulative updates. It does not have the ability to enable .NET or disable SMB version 1, etc. This PowerShell module actually has that functionality built into it and more. And then finally, the high-level goal that we want to accomplish is we want to use OSDBuilder to fully patch and perform offline servicing with the latest servicing stack updates that we mentioned. So Adobe, if we install, which you typically for most apps, even if you don't include .NET 3.5, currently it's pretty much required for a large percentage of apps. So it's just a good idea just to enable .NET 3.5 and include the latest .NET security updates so that meets the security standards in your organization. Now, as far as SMB1, it is recommended to disable SMB1, which is disabled by default in 1809. But in some organizations, if they have legacy, which is opening yourself up for a lot of vulnerabilities. If you have vulnerabilities out there, want to acquire all these attacks and you enable SMB version 1, you're giving yourself a higher probability of being infected by that. So it's disabled by default, but if you need to enable it, or if you need to enable other features, you'll see that when we run the PowerShell module, you can enable other features as well. Some of the requirements, the number one requirement, this is critical, is that you have internet access to Microsoft Update website. So some customers directly block the Microsoft Update and the Microsoft Update catalog. And when you're doing this on a management machine running this PowerShell module, the PowerShell module will actually fail when it's trying to connect to Microsoft Update to get the updates for the servicing stack updates that we talked about in the previous slide. So this is a requirement. So if you need to have an exception on the particular user account you're using or a particular machine, go through that process to get an exception. You must have internet access to Microsoft, not just internet access, but specific access to Microsoft updates that the PowerShell module uses. You also need to set the PowerShell module or set rather the execution policy for PowerShell in general to either bypass or unrestricted. We'll set it to bypass on your management machine so that when you run a PowerShell module, it's able to run and perform the functions. On the VM that you're using, you need to, and it's recommended to use a VM. Don't you do this on a physical machine. I guess you technically could do it on a physical machine. I do it on my home machine and also my work machine. But it's best to have this as a management machine that's a VM that you can use on an ongoing basis, take snapshots, that kind of thing. So local administrative rights on the Windows 10 management machine, you need that. You also need to pre-download the Windows 10 volume license media or the MSDN media. So in your Microsoft customer subscription site, you need to either you or someone needs to download the base Windows 10 media on your behalf. So what are the real advantages of this PowerShell module is, again, like I mentioned before, being able to enable features, being able to do a bunch of different things that you can't do out of the box. So this is the advantage of doing this over just getting the latest Windows 10 version. The biggest one for me and for customers is being able to enable or disable features, as well as install OneDrive, like I mentioned earlier, and other features that you have. You need to be able to run a PowerShell command with elevated admin access, of course. One of the biggest prerequisites that we need is the Windows ADK kit. So currently, we're going to demonstrate 1809. Obviously, 1903, Windows 10 1903 is the latest version. There were some issues with 1903. I think they've been resolved by now, but in this demonstration, I'll I'll be using Windows 10 ADK 1809, installing that on the management machine. And then you need adequate space on the local hard drive that of the management machine you're using, where you're going to run this PowerShell module from month to month. So as the months go by, their drive space is going to increase. So this virtual machine is going to need adequate space. So if you're building a virtual machine or putting in a request to the organization, request that the OS disk be, say, 80 gigs or 100 gigs, but request a D drive that's maybe 500 gigs that you can use to grow this over time. Okay, so let's get into the demonstration. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to go through and look at this is going to be our WaaS machine that we're going to use to run the process. So I've got a Windows 10 machine here. It's running Windows 10 1809. It doesn't have to be joined to the domain in this case, because we're not hooking into SCCM directly from here. We're simply building the ISO media. We're then going to copy, export that to and import that into our SCCM environment. So all this is just, at this point, it's just a management machine. So the first thing is I have internet access. We're going to run an elevated PowerShell command prompt. And I'll be using this hefty notepad here. So the first thing I'll do is, let me set the execution policy first. The bypass, just click Y for this, or you can do A for all. So that's done. Now we need to install the Windows 10 1809 ADK. Now I've already pre-downloaded that. This is probably going to take a while, so let me see here. We need to go through this, click next. So we don't need these other options here. We can uncheck everything. So we just need the deployment tools, imaging configuration designer, USMT. Those are just the base tools we need for this. Okay. We'll install that. If you had a previous version of the ADK already installed on your virtual machine, you need to, and it's already installed, you're fine. But if you need to upgrade, you need to uninstall the previous version from Add Remove Programs, reboot the machine, come back and install the newer version. There's not like an in-place upgrade for this. So you have to uninstall the old version, reboot the machine, install the new version. So while that's running, let's look at a review of some of the commands that we're going to run. So the next commands that we're going to run will actually install the PowerShell module for OSDBuilder. This will go out to the internet and grab that install module. We'll import it to our local machine. Okay, looks like this is finished. Come back to this. Let's run a PE install as well. This might take a little longer. Let's see how long this takes. All right, so we'll import the module. The next command we'll run is the get down OSDBuilder for OneDrive. So we'll install this. Will basically download the OneDrive setup binary and copy it, pre-stage it to our OSDBuilder directory. We'll then mount from our virtual machine. We'll mount the Windows 10 ISO media. So I've pre-downloaded the volume license media from my MSDN subscription in this case, but you as a customer you or somebody on your behalf would go and get the ISO for that particular month. So let's say December, or it could be January of this year. We'll download that media. We'll then import that media and select the index, the enterprise index. We'll then create and run the task. Now this task, it gets associated with the imported media. So when you run this, it's going to prompt you to pick, the media that you imported in the previous step. We'll then run the download -execute option against that particular task that we built, and this will go out to Microsoft, get the updates, install OneDrive setup, and all of that into that particular media that we imported. And again, this gets populated into the OSDBuilder directory. Okay, so that finished. Let's go back here. So we have ADK is done, set execution policy is done. Now let's go to install the module. Okay, it's asking, do you trust this NuGet? So it basically requires NuGet to install as part of this module. That's what this PowerShell module uses. So we'll say yes to that to install that. The next one is we'll import. We also need to say yes to the untrusted module. Are you sure you want to install the modules from the PowerShell gallery? Yes, I am sure. We'll say A, yes to all. And so it's installing OSDBuilder. Okay, that's done. Now let's now do import. Okay, the import is done. So now if you, let's see here. So, okay, not quite. So now we're going to get the OneDrive setup binaries. So notice it created this directory. So I didn't pre-create the directory. Now, if you needed to run, if you had a different drive and you needed to reference a different drive later, I'll show you those commands real quick. But let's just, so while that's running, let's look at this on how do we create a different directory. So essentially what you do is pre-create a folder on E or D drive later called OSDBuilder. You're then going to run this command right here, get OSDBuilder -set path, and then the drive letter and the name of the folder you created. This will set OSDBuilder to that directory. You then run this command, which creates the structure for OSDBuilder based on the directory that you provided in the set command previously. So then you run this command right here. So get OSDBuilder -create paths. It'll basically create an empty structure into here, like you see here, but it will be on a different drive letter. That's really only commands you have to worry about if you want to create a different directory other than the C drive. By default, it goes to the root of the C drive on a folder called OSDBuilder. Okay, so that's done. So now the OneDrive setup finished. So if we look in our OSDBuilder directory under content, here's all the content that will be downloaded for various different modules. And one of the advantages of OSDBuilder has the ability to include Dart. It also has the ability to include, start menu layouts. So you can use this OSDBuilder PowerShell module not just for SCCM and MDT. You can use this for standalone. It has a lot more customizations than what's available in SCCM natively. So this is really good for servicing. Okay, so it did some stuff with the ADK. Okay, so where are we now? So we did the OneDrive setup. So, I was going to show you content, OneDrive. So this is the version of OneDrive. So if you go to the properties of this file, you see this version right here. Now, if you notice, there's a website. Let's do a side-by-side comparison here. So this website from Microsoft shows the release information for OneDrive setup. So if you notice, this is 19.123.0.624.05. So this is a production version of OneDrive setup. So this is the latest production version that we downloaded. Okay, so Insider Ring, Production Ring, Enterprise Ring. This version of the Enterprise Ring is multiple versions behind, if you notice that. So if you want to get a newer version, always use the production switch like we did here. So use OneDrive setup space production. Okay. Otherwise, you could use the different command you could use. So in my blog post here, you could do OneDrive setup enterprise, and that would get this ring version here. Okay. So again. So this webcast is I'll reference my blog post here. This is the step-by-steps that you can also refer to as a reference to. I have the full guide here. I thought it'd be good to, like I mentioned earlier, to have a video series. I'm from Missouri, so I learn better by being able to see things in person, the show me state. Okay, so we've got that. Now we need to mount on our VM here. We need to go to our downloads directory where you've pre-downloaded the media for Windows 10. So I'm going to look at the December ISO media for this VM. Okay, I'm going to mount that. So now we've mounted the volume license media. If we look on our VM machine here, we see the media is mounted. When you're done and completed, you just right click and hit eject, but only after you've fully run through and created the ISO and everything's completed. So now that we have the volume license media mounted, we'll run the Import-OSMedia command. It's going to scan the drive letters you have mounted. Sometimes if the media that you've downloaded is corrupt, it will not do this indexing and it will not process properly. So you need to make sure that you delete the ISO and re-download again and make sure the ISO is not corrupted. So if you run this and it finishes in 2 seconds, then that's a problem. It should pop up like this. So now this pop-up comes up and you basically need to pick the index. We're going to pick Windows 10 Enterprise in our case. Most people are going to use Enterprise in an enterprise environment or education if you're a school. So we'll pick index 3. And you can hit cancel here if you run the wrong thing or you're not sure. So it's either cancel or OK. So I'm going to click index 3, click OK. Now it's going to import that media. And essentially what it's going to do is start to stage that media to the OSDBuilder directory on my C drive under OSMedia. So it's going to create it under here. Okay, so we'll let that run for a little bit here. All right, so where were we? So we create the task. So our new task. Let's see, new task. Update-OSMedia. So once we create the task, we'll then run the Update-OSMedia, which will download it from the internet. This new task you create right here, this is where you can enable features. So I just named it .NET. You could name it whatever you want, but just name it something that's meaningful. And when you use the -enable feature -enable.net, this is going to basically tell it for this task, enable this feature all the time. So when we run this update command, on a month-to-month basis, it's going to enable that feature automatically for us. It's then going to download the content, and then we'll run the other steps here like we mentioned earlier. Okay, so now it's copying the operating system content to C, OSDBuilder, OSMedia, and then the name of it basically creates a folder based on the name of the build release that you downloaded basically. So if we click on OSDBuilder, OSMedia, it automatically creates this folder structure for you. So this is just more informative. Okay, so while we're waiting on that, let's look at the comparison. So in SCCM, what I was mentioning earlier, you have the ability to, for an operating system image or an upgrade package, you can click this schedule updates. This is what I was talking about earlier. So this is what I've tried to use and other people have tried to use in the past. This is hit and miss in terms of working. It's supposed to work consistently every time, but I've had different strange experiences with this working and not working. So you essentially are able to come in here. This is native to SCCM. However, this does not, notice it has the cumulative updates, .NET updates. It doesn't have the ability to enable .NET features or disable SMB1, enable SMB1, enable other other Windows 10 or Windows Server features into the media. So that's why I like this particular PowerShell module a little bit better, has a little bit more flexibility and options. And you can see what's going on in real time and not have to guess if the update's installed or not. Okay, so this is taking a little while, so I'm going to pause the video and then I'm going to come back. Okay, so we're back now. So this is the previous command that we ran. We imported the OSMedia, and now when we look on the particular machine, the media has been fully imported into here. It creates a log directory, as it's mentioned here on that import process that you can reference. So info logs 2019 import media 2019. So this file right here. So this shows a log of the import process itself. What happened, you can refer to that. So the next command we run, so we ran the import media. So now we want to create the task, right, to enable our features and also have our task that we're going to use on an ongoing basis. So we're going to type new-OSBuildTask task name, and then we'll give it the name that we want to use, enable feature enable net fx3. Run that, press enter. Now it's going to give us a pop-up here. So the previous command, where we imported the media, we're basically picking that option here. So we notice the date on that. Here is where, if we need to enable optional features. So say, for example, this is kind of like when you install features in Windows 10 or Windows Server. So if you wanted to enable or disable SMB version 1 protocol or the Telnet client, right, or other features that you wanted to enable, Hyper-V, right, this might be important if you're installing, Credential Guardian, you want to enable Hyper-V natively. You could pick these different optional features. I'm not going to enable any additional features, Windows 10 features, so I'm just going to hit cancel here. So as it notes right here, press OK. Now be careful with this, because by default it picks the very top option. So don't just click OK when this pops up unless you're going to enable a particular feature. See how I clicked out of that and it's highlighted in blue? It defaults to this. So if you were to click OK, it would enable App Server Client on the image. So just hit cancel if you don't want to enable any features. If you need to enable a specific feature, click on that, on the specific features you want, multi-select. You have to actually multi-select. So you have to hold down the control key and click on those features you want to enable. Right, otherwise, just hit cancel. So I'm not enabling any features here. Okay, so it should show enable.net equals true. Right, so that's the only feature I want to enable. Our next command is Update-OSMedia. So this is going to go out, and now it's going to download. It's not a valid name. Why is that not a valid name? So media. Oh, we need to make this the name of the folder that we're using. So this needs to be the actual name, not of the task, but of the folder that was created from the Import-OSMedia. So let's highlight that. Otherwise, it'll say, does not exist, which is true. It doesn't exist. So now it's going out to downloads.windowsupdate.com. Now, again, like I mentioned at the beginning, if your environment, your organization blocks access to these websites, this PowerShell point, these commands that we're running will fail. They'll be red. They'll just flash red, 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 red. All of these will fail. So not just internet access, but specific access to download.windowsupdate.com, you know, the Microsoft update catalog, essentially. This is going to take some time, so we're not going to watch paint dry. I'm going to pause the video, and we'll come back when this is done. Okay, so it's going to extract certain things. Essentially, this is going to get all the cumulative updates. It's going to enable the .NET features and what have you, and all of that will be included in this. The next command we'll run after that is this command. This will be used as the input into the ISO that we're going to generate. So we have to do the OSMedia update, download that from the internet. We then have to generate the actual OSBuild, which would then be used to create, which we use to create the actual ISO that will import into SCCM. Okay, so we'll let that run. We'll pause and come back. Okay, so now we're back, and so the last command we ran was the Update-OSMedia, the name of the task, and it downloaded and applied the updates to the OSMedia that we imported earlier. Now let me just show here that it logged everything to this directory here. Click on the machine. If you navigate to the OSDBuilder directory, OSMedia, name of the folder, info logs, this is the log file that it ran as an update on what it was doing. So this can take some while. It can be an hour or more depending on how much time you have. One thing I will mention is that you should probably have solid state drives. On my host machine I have solid state drives, Samsung Pros. This will speed up the process, but this still takes some time. So if we scroll up here, let's look at the command we ran. So we ran the Update-OSMedia command with download and execute against the OSMedia that we imported earlier. Notice here it installs dynamic update. That's new. It also includes servicing stack update, August update. Okay. It mounts the WIM, the directory that it pre-created. Then it starts to apply these updates. The next command that we'll run will be the New-OSBuild command, and this will essentially, if you look in the directory for OSBuilder, right now there's no OSBuild directory. This is the media that was imported here. This is the version of the media that we imported using the OSDBuilder script, and this is what it has written as an output so far. The next thing it's going to do is export that information as an update into the OSBuilds directory. From there, the next thing, final thing we'll do is we'll create an ISO from that. So from the PowerShell command, okay, New-OSBuild -download -execute new build, download and execute. Okay, so that's wrong command. This is the right command. So New-OSBuild -download -execute. Okay, now you're going to pick the task that you created earlier. Okay, with the OSBuild. And remember we said enable.net, so it's going to enable.net. It's not going to enable any other features because we didn't select that option. Okay, so this task also is going to take some time. It's going to apply the updates that were pre-downloaded into that OSMedia directory and start to get closer to finalization. The next thing after we run that will be the creation of the ISO, And then finally, we'll import that into SCCM. That'll be the final steps. So this also is going to take some time to process. So I'll pause the video and come back. Okay, back again. So that completed successfully, this command here. So let's look at what it did. Scroll up. New-OSBuild-download-execute. That was our last command. So it enabled .NET. It installed all the different updates that we mentioned earlier. Servicing stack update, cumulative update. You can see the August update. Here is the KB. You can copy and paste that if you want to look that up. Copy and paste, you can just highlight it, press the enter key. Paste that into Notepad. And you could look at that update article. Scroll to 1809. We notice that KB 3511553 is the latest August update for 1809. Right, we did get an error on the optional update. It didn't break the process, so we can move forward. Our final step that we're going to do in terms of using the script is going to be this command to create the ISO. And again, we're going to select, in this case, we're going to select the OSBuild. But it just created that here. So if we look in the directory, OSBuilder directory, OSBuilds, this is the directory that it created with those updates. So we want to make sure we select that, and we select the media type needs to be selected of OSBuild. Generate the ISO. Okay, so every other month, every time you run this will get appended. Name get appended, so just pay attention to what you're selecting and when you're running it each month. Okay, so it starts to build the ISO. It's going to dump it out to the directory. It's going to be an ISO folder that it creates, and that's what we're going to use to mount to our VM and import that into SCCM. Now we could also test this ISO by itself without SCCM, just as a dry run. We'll do both in parallel. Okay, so it outputted it to here. So if we directory, now there's an ISO here. Now this is the ISO that includes the enabling of .NET, installing of all the service stack updates, cumulative update, Adobe Flash, all that is included here. So what we need to do on this VM, of course, we can eject the initial media that we imported. The initial one that we imported, we simply eject that. Actually, we need to do it from here. So that's close. So what we need to do is copy this out of this VM, essentially. Let's do that. Copy it to my host machine so that I can then remount it on a different machine and test the deployment on another machine. So what I'll do is, this is our OSDBuilder testing machine. I'll mount it on this machine here. Let's finish copying, and we can test. We can do two things. We'll test the installation of just essentially like if you were installing from USB, right? We'll test just the raw installation, and then we'll import it into SCCM and test that and run that as a separate test as well. Let's recap what we did up to this point. So we installed the ADK and went through the requirements and through the prerequisite steps. We imported the OSDBuilder module. We didn't have to set a directory because we didn't have a different hard drive. Had the same C drive. If you had a different drive, a different VM rather, with multiple drives, then you could set the directory to be on a different drive letter. We imported the December Windows 10 1809 media. After mounting it on our virtual machine, we updated the OneDrive setup. We created our initial OSBuild task and made sure that we enabled the .NET feature, .NET 3.5. We then updated that OSMedia that we imported. We then created an update to that OSBuild from that OSMedia that was imported, so it enabled the features and whatnot. We then created the Media ISO. That actually goes pretty fast. Now we're going to test that ISO as well as importing it into SCCM. Then we'll go on to the monthly cycle steps and some other helpful PowerShell commands. So almost finished here. It's good to have a solid state drive when you're doing this. It makes everything go a lot faster actually than spinning hard drives. You should not be using spinning hard drives anymore if at all possible, especially for running this sort of process. Okay, so that's copied. So now on our demo machine here, I will navigate to that ISO that I just copied down. To here. So this is the ISO, just copied over. VM to boot from that DVD, that ISO. Connect. And I'll catch this in time. Start it. Don't care about checkpoints. So checkpoints enabled. Didn't. Turn this off and try again. Won't boot correctly. Alright, so I'm not going to go through the installation of this, but essentially you could mount the ISO on your machine, select the boot option, select the ISO on your host machine, set the DVD to be the first boot option, and you could go through and manually test this outside of SCCM. So that's an option. Okay, I'm going to actually import this to SCCM. So let's eject it from there. SCCM server. We're going to navigate to that ISO that we copied over. So on our SCCM server, what I'll do is I'll create a directory based on this name so it matches. SCCM server. Here. So basically what you want to do is open the DVD that you've mounted here, and navigate to the source directory and in the install WIM. This is what actually gets updated along with other files. Copy this to our new folder here. Okay, so that's done copying. So in our SCCM console, we're going to add a new operating system. Okay, and I'll put here. Too many servers. Actually, CM01. I'll give it a similar name, and I'll just make a comment here. Created with OSDBuilder PowerShell module, August 16th, 2019. Distribute that content. Give that a few seconds to update. It doesn't give me space issues. I'm gotten a lot of space. I thought I had more space on this. So do a little cleanup here. Things I don't need. We've copied this over. We're safe to dismount that. Now what I'll do is, while I'm waiting on that, I'll go ahead and update. So what you want to do is update your task sequence. So navigate to your task sequence, right? Like you go to the edit option. And I'll reference this. We won't be able to run it yet until it's finished replicating, but we'll at least reference it. So this is the default media that I was referencing, my task sequence. I will now point to this, which is what we just imported into SCCM. Hit apply. Okay, so that's referenced. Windows 10 Enterprise. All the latest cumulative updates are in there. Enabling of .NET. Okay, so that's finished distributing. Now we can kick off our client device. Kick off the deployment. So we'll go to this guy. Navigate to our SCCM network boot media. Set to boot that. I will turn off this VM using to build the ISO for the OSD builder. Okay, let's just make sure we have it right. That network, hit connect, start that. Okay. So we'll run this task sequence, New-OSBmedia, then I'll pause the video and come back. This will take about 17 minutes. And my VM environment here goes pretty fast actually. Let's hit next. Pick our task sequence. Task sequence dependency resolve. Now it's partitioning, and it should see that updated. When it gets to the apply operating system step, we should see the new reference WIM that we imported earlier. So in this task sequence, this is an MDT integrated task sequence, so it will bring up the Microsoft UDI deployment wizard where I can type in the computer name and select other applications that I want to install based on the customizations I created for the UDI page. All right, what's next? That username. It's going to join to the domain. Additional apps needed. Central time zone. There. Apply operating system. So it's download that, install that WIM. So I will pause the video here, and we'll come back after this is finishing deployment. Okay, so we're back now. The deployment has finished. Let's start this machine. We'll log in locally. Okay, so we have our custom start menu. Let's check on the version install. So if we run the win-ver command, we should see 678. It's our fully patched machine. So we tested that successfully. Now we can deploy this to other rings or within our enterprise, whatever our deployment process is at this point. Let's look at other updates are installed. We should see installed updates. So there we have it. So all of the cumulative updates for the month. These Adobe Flash Player features should be enabled. .NET 3.5 is enabled. So we good. Okay, so let's shut that down. Start up our OSDBuilder reference machine that we're using to build the updates with. So let's go through. The final piece is helpful commands that we can use with OSDBuilder. So the first one is get OSDBuilder. This will tell us what version we have installed. So let's just do that I'll do that on my host machine here. So get OSDBuilder. This will tell us multiple things, what path we have defined, directory we're using, what version we have. So this is important. So the current version 19.8.15, version that I have installed is 19.6. Next command we can run is OSBuilder OSDBuilder-update. This will update to the latest version. So OSDBuilder-update. Now I've already, the machine I was using to demonstrate this with, this machine running that we built the ISO with, that machine didn't have a previous version, so it was the latest version. So this is what it will look like when it updates each subsequent month that you patch your media. Okay, so let's bring up the virtual machine and we can display what OSD builds we have installed. Type git OSBuilds, enter. That will show us a list of the OS builds that we have installed on a particular machine. So if I do that on my host machine here, git-OSBuilds, I got an error, but that's okay. It still showed me the builds I have. Now it could be because I've deleted some of these directories. Then we can also type git OSMedia, and that will tell us what media we have imported and which one were not imported, but which ones that basically were updated. And if we look on our directory here, we should see this is the initial version we imported. This is the patched OS media, and this is finally the output of that, which includes the ISO that we then use to import it back into SCCM. So that wraps up our conversation about OSDBuilder PowerShell module, the commands, how we can import it, how we can apply particular feature updates, cumulative updates, and other features. So I have a few references here if you'd like to look at the step-by-steps outside of the video. I have a link to that here. This is my blog post with the text-based blog post of these steps for more details. Pretty much the same steps we went through in the video. If you are using Twitter, you can follow @Segura, SEGURA-OSD on Twitter. He's the developer for this, the one who maintains and basically came up with this idea of this PowerShell module. So this is what this framework is all about. So follow him on Twitter, and you can also look at the release information as we shown earlier. So I thank you for your time and appreciate you watching this video, and I look forward to talking to you again.